When you fail to define your boundaries, you are silently granting others permission to overstep them. People don't automatically know what you find acceptable or unacceptable. In the absence of clarity, they will treat you based on their own standards, not yours. That's not cruelty, it's human nature. Without boundaries, you become the canvas for everyone else's projections, expectations, and behaviors. Boundaries are not walls to isolate yourself, they are frameworks to protect your values. They tell people how you expect to be treated and, more importantly, what you will not tolerate. If you consistently let things slide, just to keep the peace, you are training the people around you to ignore your needs. Over time, this doesn't just erode respect, it erodes your sense of self. The fear of losing relationships often keeps people from asserting boundaries. But a relationship that requires self-betrayal to maintain is already broken. Saying no to what drains you is not selfish, it is self-respect. People who truly value you will not only accept your boundaries, they will honor them. Those who push back are revealing that your discomfort serves their convenience. Clarity is kindness. When you articulate your boundaries calmly, directly, and without guilt, you reduce the need for conflict later. Ambiguity breeds confusion, and confusion breeds resentment. You don't need to explain your boundaries in a lengthy emotional monologue. A clear, simple, "I don't accept that," or "that doesn't work for me," is more than enough. Boundaries must be enforced consistently, or they become empty words. If someone violates a boundary and you do nothing, you've communicated that the line was imaginary. People remember patterns more than declarations. What you tolerate, you endorse. Holding your line is not about proving a point, it's about preserving your self-worth. Your time, energy, and emotional bandwidth are finite resources. Boundaries are how you manage those resources. Every time you say yes to someone else at the expense of your own needs, you're making a trade, often one that depletes rather than nourishes. Respect for yourself is demonstrated in how you allocate your presence. Don't confuse boundaries with bitterness. You can love someone and still refuse to let them mistreat you. You can be kind and still be firm. In fact, the most authentic form of compassion is rooted in truth, not accommodation. When you know who you are and what matters to you, boundaries become an act of alignment, not aggression. Setting boundaries is a lifelong discipline, not a one-time declaration. It evolves as you grow, learn, and experience the consequences of overextension. The stronger your internal compass, the less external validation you'll need. Boundaries, ultimately, are not about control. They're about clarity of self. Values are not seasonal preferences. They are guiding principles meant to anchor you when everything else is uncertain. If you change your stance depending on who's watching, you are not living by values, you're performing. The real test of integrity is whether you hold firm to what you believe when it costs you something. Approval, comfort, status, or even relationships. Consistency in values is what builds credibility. People may not always agree with you, but they will learn to trust you if you are predictably rooted. In a world saturated with shifting narratives and moral relativism, the person who remains steady becomes a reference point. You become the person others look to, not because you're perfect, but because you don't sell your soul for convenience. The temptation to compromise your values often shows up subtly. You let a joke slide that violates your conscience. You stay silent in a room where truth needs to be spoken. You excuse behavior you know is wrong to avoid confrontation. Each moment may feel small, but over time, they accumulate into a life of quiet regret and moral erosion. Consistency requires that you live the same message in private that you speak in public. If you champion honesty but manipulate behind closed doors, people will eventually feel the dissonance. Authenticity means there's no performance gap. What you say, what you believe, and how you act are integrated. That alignment commands respect, not by force, but by coherence. Your values must be tested to become real. You only know the strength of a foundation when it's under pressure, when you choose to do what's right rather than what's easy, especially when no one is watching. You're not just defending your values, you're fortifying your character. Every choice becomes a brick in the structure of your identity. Being consistent doesn't mean being inflexible. It means your principles are stable, even if your methods adapt. You can learn, grow, and evolve without abandoning your moral core. There's a difference between changing because you've matured and compromising because you're afraid. The former is strength, the latter is erosion. People are watching how you live, especially when you don't realize it. Your children, your peers, your community, they are all subconsciously absorbing what you tolerate, what you stand for, and what you allow to slide. The consistency of your values teaches louder than any words you'll ever say. It is a silent form of leadership that leaves a deeper impact than grand speeches. When your values are non-negotiable, decisions become simpler. You don't have to calculate what version of yourself to be in each room. You don't have to keep track of what you said to whom. You simply respond from the same internal compass every time, and that clarity frees you from the exhausting burden of pretense. Rising your voice doesn't make your words more meaningful. It often reveals your lack of control. Calm authority isn't about volume, it's about clarity, certainty, and emotional discipline. When you speak from a place of composure, people listen not because they're intimidated, but because they sense that you're anchored in something deeper than impulse. Emotionally reactive people often lose respect, not because their points are invalid, but because their delivery overshadows their message. Anger, defensiveness, or desperation can cloud your credibility. When your tone escalates, your influence diminishes. A calm presence communicates confidence far louder than any outburst ever could. Calm authority isn't passive. It's powerful restraint. It's choosing not to respond just to be heard, but waiting until your voice can bring clarity instead of chaos. This control doesn't signal weakness. It signals that you are in command of yourself, and people respect what you've mastered internally far more than what you demand externally. People don't remember every word you say, but they do remember how you made them feel. If you communicate through emotional volatility, others begin to brace for impact rather than lean in with trust. But when you speak with steadiness, even your disagreements feel safe. That safety fosters respect, not just for what you say, but for who you are. There is a discipline in pausing before responding, in allowing silence to do some of the work. That pause is not emptiness, it's space for intention. Most people rush to fill every moment with noise, but a measured voice cuts through that noise like a signal through static. Stillness in speech amplifies authority because it forces people to lean in, not pull away. When you stop trying to overpower others and start focusing on owning your message, you shift from confrontation to influence. Calm authority invites dialogue rather than war. It holds the room not by domination but by presence. And presence is cultivated in solitude, reflection, and the hard discipline of knowing who you are. Many think power is about being the loudest in the room, but true leadership is marked by the one who can remain grounded when everyone else is losing their center. The one who can articulate a firm boundary or deliver uncomfortable truth with grace and steadiness becomes unforgettable. That voice commands not out of fear, but out of earned respect. Practicing calm authority requires you to deal with your own inner chaos. If your emotions are always leading your words, you're not speaking from strength but from reaction. But when your thoughts are processed, your emotions integrated, and your principles clear, then your voice becomes a vessel of influence rather than a weapon of instability. Walking away is not a sign of defeat. It is the ultimate declaration of self-respect. It means you have weighed the cost of staying, of arguing, of justifying yourself in a place where dignity is being drained, and decided that your integrity is more valuable than anyone else's validation. It's not about ego. It's about recognizing that not all battles deserve your energy. In many cases, people stay longer than they should. In relationships, in jobs, in conversations, because they fear being seen as weak or disloyal. But true strength lies in discernment, in knowing when something or someone no longer aligns with your values. Walking away is the quiet courage of putting principles before appearances, peace before chairs. You are not obligated to explain your departure to those who never honored your presence. If you walk away to protect your mind, your spirit, or your purpose, you owe no one a justification. The right people will understand. The wrong ones will call it abandonment, manipulation, or pride. But you don't owe clarity to people who only brought confusion. There's a false nobility in enduring what diminishes you. Endurance is not always virtue. It becomes self-betrayal when it requires you to silence your worth. Walking away is a reclaiming of personal narrative, a refusal to let someone else's dysfunction dictate your emotional climate. It's a choice to stop bleeding for someone who never acknowledged the wound. Often, what keeps people from walking away is the illusion of hope, that things will change, that the disrespect will stop, that your effort will be appreciated. But hope without evidence becomes a trap. When the patterns repeat, when your presence is taken for granted, when you are reduced rather than restored, the wise choice is distance. Walking away is not avoidance. It's confrontation by different means. It says, I refuse to engage on terms that dishonor me. It requires clarity of mind and a regulated heart, because impulsive exits are not the same as intentional ones. A true exit is not reactive. It's rooted in deep self-awareness and firm boundaries. You don't have to burn bridges, but you also don't have to keep walking back across ones that collapse every time you step on them. Some situations are not waiting for you to fix them. They are waiting for you to leave so you can heal. And healing, real healing, often begins with a physical departure long before the emotional one catches up. Walking away is about choosing growth over familiarity, peace over proximity, truth over convenience. It's the action of someone who has done the inner work to understand their value, someone who is no longer willing to argue for space in places where they were only ever tolerated, not treasured. There comes a point where constantly explaining yourself becomes less about clarity and more about chasing approval. The urge to be understood is human, deeply rooted in our desire for connection and validation. But when you're explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, you exhaust your energy trying to bridge a gap they have no intention of crossing. You don't owe explanations to those who question your worth more than your words. When your intentions are consistently doubted, when your motives are always second-guessed, it's not clarity they seek. It's control. And no amount of detailed explanation will satisfy someone who thrives on keeping you off balance. There's dignity in silence when the alternative is self-betrayal. Every time you over-explain your choices, your values, or your boundaries, you're asking for permission that you never needed. It's one thing to communicate with someone who's listening. It's another to repeatedly pledge your truth to someone who has already made up their mind. Some people don't want to understand you. They want to keep you justifying yourself so they can maintain power in the conversation. This is not about dialogue, it's about dominance. And the more you explain, the more ground you lose. There's strength in stating your position once and letting your actions carry the rest. You must recognize the difference between being understood and being validated. Understanding can happen in silence. Validation, on the other hand, becomes a game of performance, one where you twist your truth to fit someone else's comfort. The goal is not to be constantly affirmed by others, but to live in alignment with yourself. When you stop explaining yourself, you start conserving energy for what matters. You begin to trust your inner compass more than external opinions. You develop a quiet confidence that doesn't need applause. You learn that people who truly care won't demand endless justification. They'll meet you with curiosity, not interrogation. Silence becomes a boundary. It signals, I'm not here to convince, I'm here to live. You stop trying to make everyone comfortable with who you are, and instead become comfortable with losing those who can't accept you. This is not arrogance, it's maturity. It's the result of living through enough distortion to finally value your own clarity. Explaining less doesn't mean you care less. It means you've outgrown the need to shrink your experience into someone else's framework. It means you've learned that peace isn't found in perfect understanding. It's found in self-respect, practiced daily, even when misunderstood. Accountability is not about punishment. It's about clarity, responsibility, and respect. When we hold others accountable, we're not attacking them, we're affirming that their actions have consequences. To do this without cruelty requires emotional discipline, a firm understanding of boundaries, and the courage to stand in truth without wielding it like a weapon. Many people conflate kindness with permissiveness. But letting people consistently violate your time, your space, or your values without consequence isn't compassion. It's self-neglect. You can address harm, broken trust, or unmet expectations directly without demeaning the person. In fact, the most respectful relationships are built on the strength to confront with care. The cruelty often comes from unresolved emotion. Anger, resentment, betrayal. If you don't process those internally, you'll project them outwardly when holding others accountable. That projection becomes lashing out, sarcasm, or withdrawal. But true accountability is clean. It doesn't need to be loud or sharp. It just needs to be honest. Start by being specific. Vague accusations confuse and escalate tension. Instead of saying, "You never respect me," you say, "When you dismissed my idea in front of the team without asking for clarification, it felt dismissive." Precision disarms defensiveness and makes room for dialogue rather than defense. Keep your tone grounded. Tone communicates as much as your words. A calm, steady voice conveys that you're not looking to shame, but to resolve. When you stay emotionally regulated, you model maturity and often invite the other person to rise to that level too. It becomes less about conflict and more about alignment. Set clear expectations going forward. Accountability isn't just about pointing out what went wrong. It's about outlining what needs to change. It's not enough to say, "This hurt." You follow it with, "Here's what I need from you in the future." That shift creates structure for growth, not just space for guilt. Boundaries reinforce accountability. When someone repeatedly disrespects your limits, your job isn't to teach them, it's to protect yourself. Holding them accountable might mean limiting access, not in revenge, but in self-preservation. It's a quiet but powerful way of saying, "You're free to act, and I'm free to respond." Ultimately, holding people accountable without cruelty is about staying rooted in dignity, yours and theirs. It means refusing to diminish someone while refusing to be diminished yourself. It means choosing clarity over conflict, firmness over fury, and long-term respect over short-term relief. Leading yourself first is the foundation of any authentic influence. Before you can ask others to follow, change, or trust, you must demonstrate mastery over your own choices. Self-leadership is about developing internal alignment between your values, your words, and your behavior. When those three don't match, people can feel it. And so can you. It begins with self-awareness. You can't lead yourself if you don't know who you are, what you stand for, or where your blind spots lie. That requires deep, often uncomfortable introspection. You have to ask hard questions. What drives me? What do I avoid? When do I betray myself to fit in or feel safe? These answers don't just give you clarity. They build integrity. Discipline follows awareness. Once you know your values, you have to act in accordance with them, especially when it's inconvenient. That means making your bed when no one sees it, showing up on time when it doesn't matter to others, and saying no when your soul whispers, even if your ego wants to be liked. Self-discipline isn't restriction. It's self-respect in motion. Emotional regulation is another mark of self-leadership. You can't control everything, but you can control how you respond. Leaders who erupt, withdraw, or deflect blame aren't grounded, they're reactive. Leading yourself means pausing before you speak, breathing before you act, and choosing not to let your emotions hijack your principles. Leading yourself also involves owning your decisions and their consequences. Blame is easy, responsibility is rare. When things go wrong, weak people look outward. Strong people look inward. They ask, What did I do to contribute to this? That humility doesn't make you weak. It makes you trustworthy. Clarity of purpose sharpens your leadership. Without a vision, you wander. Self-leadership means identifying your personal mission, not what others expect from you, but what you're uniquely called to do. And once you know that, you structure your days, your habits, and your environment to align with that mission. Not distract from it. Boundaries are also a form of leadership. When you say yes to everything, you dilute yourself. When you tolerate toxicity, you teach others that you'll betray yourself to keep the peace. Leading yourself means drawing lines that protect your energy, your time, and your mental space so that what matters most actually gets your best. Lastly, leading yourself means becoming the kind of person you would follow. Not someone who's perfect, but someone who's honest about their imperfections. Someone who tells the truth even when it costs. Someone who keeps promises made in private. Someone who doesn't need applause to do what's right. Disrespect rarely appears out of nowhere. It often grows in the spaces where clarity and conviction are absent. Before you react, before you defend yourself, pause and ask the most important question: why is this happening? Understanding the root of disrespect is not weakness. It's strategic self-leadership. If you can diagnose the cause, you can change the dynamic. Sometimes disrespect is a mirror. It reflects not only how others see you, but how you might be presenting yourself to the world. Have you been passive when you should have been assertive? Have you allowed patterns of dismissal, interruption, or condescension without setting boundaries? Your tolerance teaches people how to treat you other times. Disrespect is projection. People bring their own fears, insecurities, or resentment into their interactions. If you are confident, someone insecure may interpret that as arrogance. If you are focused, they may accuse you of being cold. This doesn't excuse the behavior, but recognizing it helps you detach emotionally and respond wisely. Disrespect can also stem from inconsistency. If your actions don't match your values, if your boundaries shift based on who you're talking to, you create confusion. And where there's confusion, there's often disregard. People don't respect mixed signals, they respect congruence. Clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, is always more powerful than comfort. You must also examine the context. Are you in environments where disrespect is normalized? Sometimes we think we're the problem when in fact we've been operating in systems. Workplaces, families, circles where toxic patterns are the norm. If that's the case, your clarity might not fix the disrespect, but it can give you the courage to exit. It's also worth asking what internal stories you've been carrying. Do you subconsciously believe you deserve to be overlooked or dismissed? Beliefs formed in childhood or early adulthood often shape our tolerance for mistreatment. If your baseline narrative is, "I have to earn love," you may overextend and invite imbalance. Sometimes disrespect is simply ignorance. People don't know your boundaries because you haven't clearly defined them. They interrupt, demand, or downplay because you haven't drawn a line. The good news is that's fixable. But it starts with identifying where you've remained silent out of fear, politeness, or discomfort. Lastly, ask yourself what you're afraid will happen if you confront the disrespect. Many tolerate mistreatment because they fear abandonment, judgment, or conflict. But understanding that fear gives you power. When you name the fear, you can face it. When you face it, you become the kind of person no one disrespects twice.